Chaos and panic at Kabul airport as people try to flee Afghanistan, now controlled by the Taliban. As Western countries try to get their staff and nationals out, thousands of local people surge onto the airport runway. Here, the Prime Minister is chairing an emergency meeting in Downing Street as the Defence Secretary says he's worried that not everyone will be able to leave Afghanistan.
Part of regret for me. Some people won't get back. Some people won't get back, and we will have to do our best in third countries to process those people.
The Taliban says it's achieved its aim, what it calls the freedom of its country.
We want an Afghan inclusive Islamic government. So by that we mean all other Afghans have also participation in that government.
We'll have the latest from Kabul, Washington and Westminster, also this lunchtime. A 1-minute silence is held in Plymouth to remember the 5 people killed in last week's mass shooting.
At the moment, Kiev is grieving. We grieve because we love. Grief is love. We are in shock, feel guilty and angry about the events surrounding the deaths of our beloved community members.
People who've had both COVID jabs no longer have to isolate in England and Northern Ireland if they're in contact with someone who has the virus, to help firms struggling with staff absence. And there's frustration for England after 2 early wickets. They've struggled to make further breakthroughs against India at Lord's.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Mark Cavendish prepares to compete on home soil for the first time since his Tour de France heroics, confirming he'll race in next month's Tour of Britain.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. There is chaos and panic in Kabul as thousands of people have flocked to the city's airport, desperate to board flights out of Afghanistan after the Taliban swept into the capital last night, putting them in control of the whole country. More than 60 countries, including the US and the UK, have signed a statement saying Afghans and other citizens who want to leave must be allowed to go. Boris Johnson is at the moment chairing an emergency Cobra meeting to discuss the crisis. Our first report this lunchtime is from our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams.
At Kabul airport, the desperation is dangerous. An American military transport plane on the runway this morning, mobbed by Afghans trying to flee their country. Eventually, the plane takes off. Moments later, as it gains altitude, it appears that 2 people fall to the ground. Thousands of American and British troops have been sent to secure the airport, with helicopters being used to clear the runway. It's chaotic and ugly. Similar scenes on the civilian side, an Afghan airliner unable to leave as crowds frantically try to reach it. Outside the gates, shots ring out as the headlong dash which began yesterday continues. At least 2 people have died at the airport today, perhaps more. What a contrast with the city's deserted green zone, once home to government buildings and foreign embassies, now empty but for pockets of Taliban fighters. In a message posted on social media from their political base in Qatar, the Taliban's co-founder, Abdul Ghani Baradar, urged his men to remain disciplined. Now we have to show that we can serve our nation, he said.
We want an Afghan inclusive Islamic government. So by that, we mean all other Afghans have also participation in that government. So of course that need a little bit time and deliberation and talk.
Anxious moments for the people of Kabul, unsure what their new masters have in mind. What will their lives be like? Some skeptical that the Taliban can be taken at their word.
So what they are saying, of course, they are looking for legitimacy from all these different countries to be accepted as, like, the legitimate government of Afghanistan. But then at the same time, what are they doing in practice? A, either they don't have a control on their foot soldiers, or B, they really want the legitimacy, but they are not willing to do the work.
Huge uncertainty, too, for the aid agencies on whom so many Afghans rely. UNICEF has been in Afghanistan for decades, helping with education and health.
We will be continuing our work. The Taliban has asked us to stay. They understand the importance of our work. They understand that we're not political. They've asked us to pause our work for a couple of days while they talk to the rank and file and make sure that they understand what UNICEF is here to do and that our staff can operate safely.
Afghans have seen so much tumultuous change, experienced so many moments of trauma. This is another such moment. What will it mean for those who leave and those who stay? Paul Adams, BBC News.
Well, let's go to Washington first and join our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher. And given those scenes, continuing criticism, building criticism really of the Biden administration, Barbara.
Yes, well, certainly criticism here in Washington, Jane, from the elite circles, foreign policy pundits, former diplomats, former military officers. We know that Mr. Biden's generals did not want this move to happen. They advised him against it. They wanted to keep a small force in the country to help stabilize it. So they were unhappy anyway. But the execution is what's getting all the criticism now. Why did the administration seem so unprepared for this eventuality? Why did the military drawdown happen so fast? Why had they not anticipated the speed of the Taliban takeover? Intelligence officials had predicted that the withdrawal of the U.S. would cause the government in Kabul to collapse, but not so quickly. And they also thought that it would result in a division of power, different power centers in the country, not a full Taliban takeover. So there's a lot of criticism about that, concerns about security, whether this is going to mean that terrorist attacks are more likely, that terrorists can regroup and so on. Unfavorable comparisons being made to the U.S. exit from Saigon, the hasty route there. And you're seeing those helicopter images that look somewhat similar. The Biden administration defends itself by saying that its hand was forced by the Trump administration. Mr. Trump made a peace deal with the Taliban, which envisioned a pullout of U.S. troops by May 1st. And if the Biden administration hadn't gone along with that, then the Taliban would have resumed their attacks, and there was too small a force in the country to handle that. Now, that's open to debate. There is a lot of debate about that. But it's a question of whether voters are going to pick up on it. A majority did support his decision to leave the country. That's part of the reason why he made it. But will the humiliation of the exit affect things? And especially what happens in Afghanistan? Will the al-Qaeda regroup? And is there going to be another terrorist attack here in the United States that would have an impact?
Barbara, thank you. Barbara Plett-Usher. Well, here, as we say, there is an emergency Cobra meeting taking place this lunchtime in Downing Street. And a little earlier today, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace admitted that some people who want to leave Afghanistan won't get back. Our political correspondent Jessica Parker looks at the rapidly moving situation.
Landing in the UK in the early hours, hundreds have been evacuated, with more to follow. The government's working to get British passport holders home, as well as eligible Afghans who worked for British forces. But an emotional minister admits not everyone will make it here.
It's a really deep part of regret for me. Some people won't get back. Some people won't get back, and we will have to do our best in third countries to process those people.
Why do you feel it so personally, Mr. Wallace?
Because I'm sold. because it's sad and the West has done what it's done. And we have to do our very best, Nick, to get people out and stand by our obligations. And 20 years of sacrifice is what it is.
UK forces first went into Afghanistan in 2001 in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, joining US-led action against al-Qaeda and the Taliban. 457 British troops and personnel lost their lives during the conflict. Many more were injured. Jack Cummings was on his second tour in 2010 when he lost both legs in an explosion.
Seeing the sacrifices we've made as British soldiers, for it just to go up in smoke in a couple of weeks, you've just got to question, was it worth it? And for me, at the moment, for many of my friends messaging me, I don't think it was.
This long operation has stretched over successive prime ministers. Jack Straw, Labour Foreign Secretary for 5 years from 2001, says it was right to act 20 years ago.
A lot of good has happened over the intervening 20 years. My disagreement with President Trump, who's the architect of this chaos, and President Biden, who's in a sense implemented it, it was not over whether there was going to come a time when NATO allies and the US would have to withdraw. Of course they would. But how you did that.
Parliament will be recalled on Wednesday from its summer break to discuss the crisis. But what can be done as time ticks by?
Ensuring a process for the safety of all of those that are remaining there, and an assertion of the human rights of everybody in Afghanistan, including women and girls, particularly women and girls, and an agreement about safe and legal routes for refugees, because it is inevitable there's going to be a refugee crisis coming out of this.
Now the British military presence here, all to get people out of Afghanistan, while the world watches to see what is left behind.
And Jessica has the latest from Westminster because, as we say, an emergency Cobra meeting underway, Jessica.
Yeah, another emergency Cobra meeting where top figures in government meet to discuss the crisis. But look, there really is no sense, of course, that the British government, British authorities are in any way in control of what's happening in Afghanistan now, merely reacting to events. I think ministers will be keen to try and show they have some sort of grip on the crisis. And there is a lot to discuss. How many people will be successfully evacuated out of Afghanistan over the coming days, including those Afghans who've worked with the British authorities over recent years. Downing Street not putting exact numbers on these things. In terms of refugees, because of course, as we've been hearing, a refugee crisis of some kind is expected. What Number 10 are saying is that it will set out its approach to wider asylum claims in the coming days. More broadly, the government's still insisting that once the Americans decided to go, it wasn't feasible for the UK to stay and act unilaterally. But this, and I think as well, Britain's broader approach to foreign policy over the last 2 decades will all be up for discussion in Westminster when Parliament is recalled in 2 days' time. But that is in 2 days' time. In the meantime, in Afghanistan, events unfolding hour by hour.
Jessica Parker, thank you. And let's get the thoughts of our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale, as well. Not just a UK problem, of course, but one wonders what on earth happens next.
Yes, I mean, the Ministry of Defence insists that the military side of Kabul airport remains secure. Remember, there are about 600 British troops on the ground, plus thousands of Americans. They're flying in a few thousand more, and they still think that they will be able to continue those flights. I think the figure that was given was it could be, if it was running at full capacity, 1,000 people a day. 300 arrived last night at Brize Norton. Those flights will continue. But, you know, if you look at what's on the ground, it's not just those British nationals who they want to fly back. It's these Afghans who worked for the British interpreters, for example, people who worked for the Foreign Office. You know, there is no Afghan government. They need paperwork. Where is the paperwork? It's going to be a huge logistic effort to try to process that, let alone get the people on the plane. In addition to that, there are Afghan special forces on the ground, trained by the British and the Americans, who need to be evacuated as well, who need to be taken out of Kabul. So, you know, the big question, and the one we don't know the answer to, is how long will this air bridge remain viable? And ultimately, that is not really, I mean, it is to some extent because there are troops on the ground, but that is also in the control of the Taliban, who have now taken over Afghanistan.
Jonathan Beale, thank you. It is 14 minutes past 1. Just a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. There are desperate scenes at Kabul airport as thousands try to leave Afghanistan following the Taliban takeover. Still to come here on the programme, with some restrictions still in place, what can pupils expect as they go back into classrooms in Scotland?
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, we look back on the welcome home concert for the Olympic stars of Team GB. It was a first chance for them to all celebrate together after their successes in Tokyo.
A 1-minute silence has been held in Plymouth to remember the 5 people shot dead last week. The Home Office is asking police forces in England and Wales to review the way they deal with firearms applications in the wake of that mass shooting. Devon and Cornwall police are being investigated as to why Jake Davison was allowed to have his shotgun back in July after his licence had been revoked. Sarah Ransom has this report.
A minute to remember and reflect. Across the city, people fell silent this morning in memory of those who died in the mass shooting last week. 3-year-old Sophie Martin and her dad Lee, Kate Shepherd, Stephen Washington and Maxine Davison all died at the hands of the gunman Jake Davison. In the park next to where the shootings happened, people paused in a moment of collective grief.
It's been really hard. I think we're still all in shock. What's happened, aren't we?
It's been a very quiet place for the last few days. It's been very sombre. People have been very respectful and very kind to each other and very compassionate.
Everyone seems to know everybody, and it just felt like the right thing to do to come here and pay my respects to the victims that lost their lives, and obviously the ones that are still in hospital as well.
Community leaders also paid tribute to the 5 who died.
At the moment, Keyham is grieving. We grieve because we love. Grief is love. We are in shock, feel guilty and angry about the events surrounding the deaths of our beloved community members, because we love.
Plymouth is a place where people stand together during dark times. I hope and believe that we will get through the difficult times that lie ahead as we try to come to terms with this dreadful loss by continuing to support each other.
Questions still remain on why Jake Davison had a shotgun and how his licence was returned last month after an allegation of assault a few months ago. Jake Davison lived here in Biddick Drive. The decision to hand him back his licence is under investigation by the police watchdog. In the light of what happened last week, the Home Office is now reviewing the way all gun permits are granted for forces throughout England and Wales. Today, though, was a day to focus on the victims. This community says it may be bowed, but not broken. Sarah Ransom, BBC News, Plymouth.
People in England and Northern Ireland who've had both COVID jabs no longer have to isolate if they come into contact with someone with the virus. The change has already been introduced in Scotland and Wales. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports on the difference that the new rules will make.
Here's a place that should be doing a roaring trade with afternoon teas. But this hotel in Sutton Coldfields had to scale back as its staff keep getting pinged.
Well, normally this restaurant would be buzzing at lunchtime, but we've had to close it. We've had to close our fine dining restaurant. We've closed all our food outlets during the day.
A business trying to keep the plates spinning in the midst of a staycation boom.
We found ourselves a week last Sunday with virtually no kitchen staff. Everybody was having to self-isolate. We went down from probably 10 to 12 chefs down to 2.
I suppose today can't come soon enough.
Absolutely, it can't come soon enough. You know, it'll make such a huge difference.
At one point, more than 500,000 people were getting pinged a week, causing huge disruption for all sorts of businesses. But with 3/4 of adults fully jabbed, the government says now's the right time to relax the rules. Another huge step back to normality. From today, people in England and Northern Ireland who are fully vaccinated no longer have to self-isolate if they come into close contact with a positive case. Instead, you'll be advised to take a PCR test. If it's positive, you will still have to isolate for 10 days. Even though they're not vaccinated, the new rules will also apply to under 18s. Scotland and Wales have already made similar changes. It's all welcome news for parents doing the drop-off at this London nursery.
Every time you leave your house, you have that sort of that latent sense of dread that you might walk past somebody, you know, and not even be that close to them, and then just get, you know, the dreaded ping and have to stay at home.
It's very reassuring, I think. Yeah. The ability to not have to worry if you get pinged and just kind of get a test and see what happens.
Nursery manager Aletha agrees it's helpful, but the changes won't solve all the problems in this sector.
If you have a nursery where only half the staff have had a single jab, it will still mean closures, bubble closures. And as it is at the moment, there's a shortage of early year workers. So it will be better if we can all have the jab so that the business can continue to roll.
Today, though, is still a big shift in the rules, and many will drink to that. Emma Simpson, BBC News, Sutton Coldfield. More children in Scotland are returning to school this week, with many COVID restrictions still in place. Secondary school pupils must still wear a mask in the classroom, but entire classes will no longer have to isolate if one pupil tests positive for coronavirus. Our Scotland correspondent Alexandra Mackenzie reports.
The excitement and anticipation of a new term. Most restrictions in secondary schools, including wearing a face covering, remain in place. For these older students, it's already very familiar.
I'm really relaxed about it, considering before we stopped in June and previous to that it was like the same restrictions coming in, sanitising your hands, going straight to your classroom, wearing your face mask and social distancing from your teachers, which this will all stay the same, so there's nothing much changing.
I don't really like having to still wear a mask, but I feel like having the desk sanitised and everything sanitised basically is safer, so that's good.
How hopeful are you that you're going to be able to sit traditional exams at the end of this year?
I want to do them and I'm excited and I'm hopeful that we actually get the chance this year to do them.
I would hope they go ahead because I've still not experienced being in the exam hall yet. I think it would be quite good just to be in the exam hall and feel the pressure.
Teachers have been making final preparations. They welcome the restrictions and also the change to the self-isolation rule. A whole class will no longer need to self-isolate if one person has COVID.
The change of system will allow kids to stay in the classroom a lot more to make sure that the consistency of their learning will continue and that the learning's not impacted the same way it was previously. So it would be a great change for us and hopefully the kids will benefit greatly from that.
Because of coronavirus, education has been disrupted for the last 2 school years. Pupils and teachers here hope this year will bring much more normality.
If I was to write a whole number as a fraction, what would I put it over?
A higher maths class on a Monday morning. They hope to find out soon if traditional exams will go ahead next year. The restrictions will be reviewed in 6 weeks' time. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News, Linwood.
Aid workers in Haiti are racing to provide food, water and shelter to survivors of Saturday's earthquake before a major storm reaches the country. Hospitals are struggling to cope with thousands of injured survivors. Nearly 1,300 people are known to have died. Australia's second largest city, Melbourne, has introduced an overnight curfew in an attempt to control rising numbers of coronavirus infections. Residents must now stay at home between 9 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock in the morning unless they have an exemption permit. Here, tighter rules are being proposed for websites which resell tickets to live events like music and sporting fixtures, often at inflated prices. The Competition and Markets Authority wants a new system of licensing. Its recommendations include a ban on platforms which allow resellers to sell more tickets than they can legally buy when an event goes on sale. Israel's healthcare system will reach capacity within weeks if the current rise in COVID cases continues. That's what experts in the country are warning as Israel introduces new restrictions on entry. Israel was the first country in the world to offer vaccines to its residents, and it's already begun to administer a third jab to people over the age of 60, as Jenny Hill now reports.
In the oblivion of intensive care, the brutal reality of what this virus can do.
How old is this lady? She's 59.
59. This is Ichalov Hospital in Tel Aviv, where staff tell us they're already battling a fourth wave, and it's going to get worse. They're doing what they can, expanding the number of beds in the unit, but the number of hospitalisations, people falling seriously ill, is rising fast. It's the same across the country. And suddenly, the immediacy of the problem becomes clear. Even as we film, the doctor in charge gets a call.
Now there is a patient, CHF, ×3 vaccination. He is COVID positive with acute respiratory failure with COVID.
It's the second patient in the hospital today who now needs intensive care, but there's only one bed free.
I'm afraid the numbers will go up, and I know that I'll have to take hard decisions, whom to get into the intensive care and whom not. I was afraid of it. At all the 3 waves that we had, we took those decisions.
So what's gone wrong for Israel? This, after all, was the first country in the world to offer a vaccine to every resident. But cases are rising, the government reimposing restrictions, even considering a lockdown.
One thing that went wrong is just biology, which is the Delta variant. But then I think the other thing that went wrong is the slight euphoria that we had, thinking that this is over and not going after vaccinating those who were not vaccinated.
Israel's now banking on a third dose of vaccine, opening up centres like this to roll it out fast.
We're not sure how well we're doing, because this will take another week or two to get the figures of those who've had the third jab. The question is this third jab able to protect the people from getting infected and to have symptomatic disease? And that's we're still out on that.
No guarantees, little optimism on these wards. For Israel, this isn't so much about the rising case numbers, it's about what's happening in units like this all over the country. This is what will determine what Israel does next. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
Now to the cricket, and it's been a frustrating morning for England on the final day of the second test against India. They took 2 early wickets but have since struggled to make further breakthroughs. The tourists are 286 for 8 at lunch, giving them a lead of 259. Joe Wilson reports from Lords.
What would lure you to Lords for the 5th day of a test match? Cheaper tickets? Sure. And sport's ultimate appeal, the unknown. What would Rishabh Pant do?
Oh, here he goes.
Well, yeah, extending their lead was exactly what India wanted and what England feared. So this, for England, was bliss. Pant, possibly the world's most dashing player, gone for 22. But there were other Indian batsmen. There was Jasprit Bumrah, engaged in conversations with England which prompted the umpire to step in. Now, Bumrah had bowled aggressively at England's tail end as England did the same to him. This is a spectacle we've come to expect. Doesn't mean it's endearing. Concussion check after this. With bravery, luck and increasing judgment, India batted on, stretching both England's patience and India's lead in the match. There's one captain, watch now for the other. Joe Root unable to grasp a catch. And what about the match?
Yeah, that was an excellent morning for India, and it's really transformed the whole balance of this match because they lead at lunch by 259 runs. So really now this afternoon there will be in theory an opportunity for India to come out and bowl and England try to defend in their second innings, and the real opportunity is there for India to win this match. But Jane, I'm just going to mention one thing in passing as I stand here. During the lunch interval it has been and continues just gently to rain over Lords.
Joe, thank you. Joe Wilson there at a very noisy Lords. And let's take a look at the weather prospects wherever you are in the country. Darren Bett is the man to bring us right up to date. Hi, Darren.
Hello there, Jane. It's the height of summer, but it doesn't feel like it, does it? And rain is going to stop play, I'm afraid, at Lords. We've got this zone of thicker cloud, rain and drizzle that's heading down through the Midlands, East Anglia into the southeast. Ahead of it, we did have some sunshine. It's clouded over, a few hardy souls on the beach here in Dorset. The sunnier skies have been in eastern Scotland and they're now starting to arrive in the northeast of England, but it doesn't feel very warm because we've got a chilly northwesterly breeze. That'll push that rain and drizzle through the Midlands, away from East Anglia, brightening up here. But we've got that damper weather heading towards the southeast before it peters out later on. In the sunshine, we're likely to find temperatures 19 or 20. That's the very best of it. Further west, more cloud, still a bit of drizzle here and there. That'll still be there this evening. And overnight, that cloud pushes back towards the east. The cloud will thicken. We'll get some further rain and drizzle around, some mist and some fog over the hills in the west. Yes, it's going to be a mild night, and it'll be a lot milder than it was last night in the northeast of Scotland. The weather pattern today continues into tomorrow with high pressure to the southwest of the UK. It never reaches us just yet. This is the airflow. A long sea track means we're picking up all that moisture, all that cloud, and within that airflow, every now and again, you get these weather fronts thickening the cloud and bringing some rain. That's what's happening overnight. That's what's going to be happening tomorrow morning. So we start dull and damp, some rain and drizzle around. The worst of that probably moves away during the morning, but still some pockets of dampness left over here and there into the afternoon. May brighten up across the West Country, some eastern parts of Scotland, giving temperatures a boost to 21 Celsius. But otherwise, 17 to 20 like today is more like it. It should be around 20 to 24 degrees at this time of the year. Looking ahead to Wednesday, no significant changes, really. We've got some towns and cities on the forecast for you. A lot of clouds, sunshine in short supply. For the most part, it will be dry, but it is going to feel quite chilly. Things change a bit for Thursday. It's not going to be as windy. We don't have high pressure in the southwest. Pressure is falling, and that means more rain coming in, I'm afraid. That will move its way eastwards across Wales, across southern England, through the Midlands as well. Further north, something maybe a little bit brighter perhaps, but still some patchy rain and drizzle lingering across northern parts of Scotland. And those temperatures of 17 to 20 degrees are not changing very much, and that's disappointing really for this time of the year. So as we've seen, it's a cool week ahead, a lot of cloud around, and every now and again a bit of rain and drizzle. Jane.
Darren, thank you, I think. Darren Bett there with the latest weather prospects. Just a reminder now of our top story this lunchtime. There have been desperate scenes at Kabul airport as people try to leave Afghanistan following the Taliban takeover. The Prime Minister is chairing an emergency Cobra meeting in Downing Street right now as the situation in Afghanistan changes by the hour. And that is all from the News at One team. So goodbye from all of us here on BBC One. Let's join our news teams wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.